Hello. Today is where I'm going to be talking through all the books that I did not finish or that I DNF'd in 2025. I say all, it's actually not that many. It's less than I felt that I was not finishing. Last year, I got a little bit better at really evaluating if I was enjoying what I was reading or if I just felt like I had to for the sake of finishing the book. So it's actually only 6 books, which could be way worse. I felt like it was way more than 6, and I want to briefly go through the ones that I DNF'd and the reasonings behind why I DNF'd them. So first up, we have Beautiful Star by Yukio Mishima. I don't own this book anymore. I gave it away pretty soon after I DNF'd, and I do feel guilty about this one because it was technically a gift, and it was one of those gifts that I chose myself to replace a book that I'd been gifted that I already had, and kind of my own fault for not looking deeper into what the book is about or when it was published. But also, I feel that this front cover is quite misleading. It gives off a very different vibe from what the book is actually about and how it's written. So Beautiful Star is kind of like a sci-fi comedy written and set in 1962 Japan, amidst all the threat of nuclear war. And this entire Japanese family realizes that they are from different planets in the universe. They're all aliens, and they've all come from different planets for a specific reason, and it was to stop the nuclear war. Another one of their kind of common motivators is to find other aliens like themselves. So the thing about this book is it sounds much funnier and perhaps faster paced than it actually is, and that was my disappointment. I also didn't realize that this was written in 1962 because the cover, it was a revamped cover. It was only somewhat recently published in English and translated into English by Stephen Dodd. I've never read any Stephen Dodd translations. I don't think the translation was the issue. I think it was just the way that it was written was entirely not what I was expecting. And again, perhaps I should have done a bit more research before I chose this book, but at the same time, you never know what you're going to like unless you try something different. So I think this one was super difficult. So I started it in December 2024, finished it January 4th, 2025. So for me, that is giving it some time to sit and to really try and push through it. And I just couldn't manage it. I got 52% of the way through the book, so I gave it till halfway before I was thinking, okay, let's reevaluate and see if I'm getting anything from this book. I found it really boring and slow, and the glimmers of humor that were there were not enough to keep me engaged. So I DNF'd it, and then I also promptly unhauled it. I can't find my copy anywhere, so I think I really must have just got rid of it. The second book, however, I do still own, and that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I knew about this book for so very long. I owned this book for so very long without reading it, and I think it's one of those that I should have read when I was younger, when I was more into this type of literature, because I would have enjoyed it and I would have got through it before I knew what my reading tastes were. This was what my reading taste was. So I think I just missed the boat for my own reading style for this one. This is very fantasy heavy. You've got to learn a lot about this new fantastical world. I wouldn't say there's a huge amount of importance placed on the geography of this world, but also there's a map. So I was finding it a little hard to get up to speed. I'm just not really a huge fantasy reader anymore. I think I'm out of practice. And it follows a teenage criminal prodigy, basically, who's invited to do this heist that he knows is going to be very difficult. He? I think so. Yes, he. I can't even remember the gender of the main character. It's kind of like bringing together a bunch of different outcasts to go do this very important, very tricky heist. And how far did I get in? So I got this far through. Admittedly, not very far through before I decided to not finish it. And I found this so horribly slow. I really just did not care much for the way that things were explored. I didn't find the world building or description of the settings engaging. Part of this book is the fact that we're reading about teenagers. There is plot-specific significance that they are teenagers, which I've seen some controversy over a republished version where they're kind of like subtly aged up, and it takes away a lot of the political, social significance of the characters originally being teenagers. But I just don't think I have much interest reading about heists from teenager perspectives. I was just thinking I'd rather be reading from an adult perspective. Saying that, I am gonna keep this copy because I think I will try and tackle it again, because people have talked a lot about Leigh Bardugo and her writing, and this is kind of the better series. She's held in very high regard in fantasy writing, and I need to figure out, do I just not like her writing, or am I not checked into fantasy anymore? I think that would be really interesting for me to figure out. I got 23% through this book before I DNF'd it 3rd of June. This is what I mean by I feel like I DNF'd more than I actually did, because from DNFing my first book in January to then only DNFing one in June is a pretty long time to not be DNFing anything. I think I enjoyed quite a lot of what I read in 2025. Next is a really random one, and it's Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing and Song. This was purely a curiosity read because I think around August, maybe July of 2025, a live action adaptation of this webcomic was coming out and some trailers had been released. And I remember seeing it on Twitter and thinking, like, clearly this means a lot to a lot of people. But what is this? I've never heard of this before. And then I'm not into webcomics anymore. This one, I was super curious about wanting to know who the characters were that these Korean actors were playing, basically, because I knew these Korean actors. I basically just got swept away with the gossip. I wanted to know why everyone loved this webtoon, and I wanted to know why everyone was so disappointed by the live action adaptation. So I started reading volume 1 on my phone, and I was very much skim reading this. I was not paying huge attention to the dialogue. So what Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint is about, the main character of this webtoon ends up getting stuck into his favorite web novel, and it's one of those similar to like Alice in Borderland. Like, you've got these different trials and things to be fighting other people about, and you've got to use your smarts, you've got to use your strength, all of these different things. But his edge is that this is his favorite web novel. He knows how the plot goes, he knows what's coming next, and he can use that to his advantage. It is an interesting premise, but like I said, it's more about the execution. It's nothing that I haven't read or seen before, so I wasn't super excited to carry on reading it. I started this 21st of July, and I got 30% of the way through volume 1, and then on the 5th of August, without having read a single other page, I DNF'd it. So very much something I binge read in one go and forgot about. So I just DNF'd it. It's not for me. I did not find it very interesting. I didn't think the premise was super mind-blowing or anything that I hadn't seen done in a slightly different way. The next one I DNF'd, and I don't think I talked about this on camera. I certainly talked about selecting this book in a TBR video, but I don't think I ever followed up with what I thought, and that is the major works of Oscar Wilde, this really big book that completely got destroyed when I was reading it. I snapped the spine a few times. I kind of didn't mean to, it just happened, and it was so loud. I was doing it on the ground floor of my house, and someone from the first floor heard it and asked me if I was okay. I was like, yeah, I'm fine. Did you hear that? That was just my book spine snapping. I got a significant way through this book. I read 76% of this, and to be honest, when I started, I maybe should have known it was ambitious to try and go through such a huge selection of his works, because really what I'm here for is the picture of Dorian Gray. It even says at the bottom, including the picture of Dorian Gray, because that's what people are mostly here for when it comes to reading Oscar Wilde. If you've never read Oscar Wilde before, I thought that the picture of Dorian Gray was just fine. It was okay. I don't think it was overwhelmingly creepy or scary or eerie or significant. I think the concept is just inherently cooler than the execution ever will be for the picture of Dorian Gray. I thought it went on for entirely too long, and some characters or descriptions I just did not care for. And this was the first story in this collection. This was not the first story in this collection, hang on. But before we even got to the picture of Dorian Gray, we had to get through a few other of his stories. Lord Arthur Saville's Crime and The Happy Prince and The Devoted Friend. I don't really remember these first 3 stories. I don't remember much, except like a few pinpoints where I was thinking, oh, that's funny, or that's aged very badly, which is something I would then go on and learn more about the more that I read. Then we got to the picture of Dorian Gray. I was finding it difficult to get through his fiction, so that's the end of the fiction, and we went into critical dialogues, plays, poems and prose. The critical dialogues I had no bloody interest in at all. I found them direly boring, and the highly philosophical parts of the picture of Dorian Gray is what I found difficult and what I found really slow and had very little interest in. So following up with these critical dialogues, which is essentially the most boring parts of the picture of Dorian Gray for me, I skim read these very, very quickly. So I got through 3 of his plays. Well, I got through 2.5 of his plays. It was An Ideal Husband that pissed me off so badly, because there were so many repeated instances of anti-Semitism and misogyny, obviously, but wow, there were particular moments where there was just this one Jewish character that Wilde could not get over explaining horrifically throughout most of An Ideal Husband, and there were glimmers of this throughout his other plays and his fiction too. So I don't want to say it's the first instance of anti-Semitism coming up, but the sheer number of times and the sheer focus on it in An Ideal Husband, I couldn't get past it. I just thought, you know what, I just don't care to keep reading on to listen to more of Oscar Wilde's anti-Semitism and the misogyny. The sexism was wild. I couldn't justify reading the rest of it to myself. I just kept on getting too angry, and I didn't care enough with what I was engaging with to make it worth sitting through that. So that is why I DNF'd. I didn't mind his fiction writing. I didn't find it particularly interesting either, though. The only thing I did after reading An Ideal Husband is I did go and get through The Importance of Being Earnest, because I saw that performed and I really enjoyed the performance. I wanted to see how the play read differently from how it was performed, but that was, again, very much a skim read. I kind of knew most of what was going to happen and what was going on. So I did get through quite a large portion. Oscar Wilde's The Major Works, I ended up DNFing that September 14th. The next book I DNF'd I also don't have a copy of, and it's Time Shelter by Georgi Gospodinov. Is it Georgie or Gorgi? I always forget. I think I did talk about not finishing this one in one of my videos, but the plot of this book is a guy, an unnamed narrator, is basically tasked with opening this clinic and gathering all of these relics of the past, and soon people seek out the clinic to help lose themselves in their memories, go back in time, so to speak, amongst all of these floors of this clinic that take you back in time because they contain the relics of that year. Essentially, it becomes a time shelter where people can seek comfort in the fact that time is no longer passing and they can go back to specific times in their life where they felt better. The thing about Gospodinov's writing is that I find it very difficult to get through. I'm often lost understanding where exactly we are in the world, who exactly we're listening to, who exactly is telling the story, and who that person telling the story is talking to within the book itself. Everything feels very abstract and intangible to me within this book. I couldn't do it. I tried quite hard, and I tried multiple different times to get into it with different perspectives, mindsets, just thinking, before bed, no, not happening. Maybe on a train when I'm traveling and I feel really motivated. No, that's not happening either. How about in the morning? No. All of these times that I tried to read it, it just was not clicking, and the premise always sounded better to me than the execution did. I'm sure this book probably gets better as it goes on, but I did not have it in me to continue to find out if it did, because I was getting too lost, too confused, and didn't really care for his writing style. But this is the second Gospodinov book that I've tried to read. The first one I read, I did get all the way through, and I didn't really understand what I was reading then either, so I was familiar with that confusion, and I just didn't really feel like repeating it with the second book of his. I DNF'd that November 13th. The final book that I DNF'd, and I have talked about this. I talked about this in my November reading vlog. I remembered which video it was. It was the 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade. I've dropped everything that's on my desk during this video. Yeah, this one. Remember this one? Remember when I talked and ranted about this one for a while? This is why I'm going to keep this video a bit more brief, because I have talked about some of these in general, but I have said this before and I will say it again. Those of you who've read this book will know exactly why I DNF'd it, and exactly why so many people will DNF it if they ever try it, because it is just horrific. It is genuinely horrible. It's nasty. It really tests your resilience, but also, I think, your patience, because this is a really fucking boring book. The very basic premise of this book is that 4 wealthy dudes decide to kidnap a bunch of children teenagers and basically spend 120 days committing depraved acts against these children whilst bringing in these storytellers with these amazing, illuminating stories, but really it's just them discussing all of the depraved acts that they've done themselves and when they first committed their depraved act. It is a manuscript that the Marquis de Sade wrote when he was in prison, and he wrote it entirely when he was in prison, hid it in the wall of his prison cell, and probably never intended for it to be published. So it is like a half-finished manuscript as well, and that adds to the difficulty of understanding really what is going on and what you're reading. There are some parts that are missing in terms of some character backgrounds, but even then the character backgrounds of the four main wealthy dudes are so in-depth. It talks about their hygiene levels and the shapes and sizes of their bodies and their preferences in every facet of life. And then it goes into depth about how they captured like all 24 kids. I think it's 24. I don't even want to talk about this in that much depth. It's so horrible. For half of it, you're just reading note forms of like horrible acts that people commit against other people or children. Or it's supposed to be like this commentary on violence and wealth. And I'm so tired of thinking and talking about this book. So I did try. I tried very hard and I didn't get that far into this book. I was really pushing myself to try and finish it. I got 21% of the way through. I DNF'd it on the 23rd of November. November was a rough month for reading because I really pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and a lot of it I didn't feel like finishing because it was just nasty or boring. And this book was both. It is nasty and it is boring and it is not worth your fucking time. I would love to have a discussion with someone who's read the entirety of this book and can speak to me about what they found interesting, because I felt unwell. I felt sick and disengaged, and I felt a lack of hope in humanity. To be so honest, I didn't need a book that told me that, because the current state of the world is enough to have a lack of hope in humanity. So I do not need to be reading this book to add on top of that. That was the final book that I DNF'd in 2025. I got through the end of the year pretty smoothly. And as I said, I'm feeling much less shameful about the act of DNFing. There's nothing shameful about it, obviously. Like, there's no need to force yourself through a book that you're really struggling with. Yeah, these ones, no. Either were just not my style, not the right time, or were just shit. That's it for this video. I did say I would try to keep it brief, but I've been filming for 40 minutes, so let's see how much I can edit this down. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.